Lindsey, what's in your lens today?
We're talking about Chicago. So this week, Chicago has been at the center of a federal crackdown called Operation Midway Blitz, an immigration enforcement surge that's brought more arrests than usual. Officials are saying they're targeting undocumented immigrants who've committed crimes, but the rollout has sparked major backlash, to say the least. Now, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson has made his stance clear, writing on X, quote, "Chicago doesn't want to see reckless, unconstitutional, militarized immigration enforcement in our city." And here's why that matters. Fear spreads fast. The fear doesn't stop at people without papers. It spills into the entire community. Parents worry about whether it's safe to take their kids to school. Workers worry about getting to their jobs. Families feel the ripple effect, even if they're not the ones that ICE is looking for. But this story took a devastating turn on Friday. Federal authorities say 53-year-old Silverio Villegas Gonzalez resisted arrest, tried to flee, and dragged an ICE officer with his car. That officer then shot and killed him. DHS says the federal agent feared for his life. And let's be clear, no officer should have their safety put in jeopardy while doing their job. That's absolutely not okay. Still, Gonzalez's story doesn't end there. Illinois U.S. Representative Delia Ramirez said he had just dropped off his kids at school before being shot. Think about that for a second. A father's last moments happening right after he said goodbye to his children. Now, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson called it, quote, an avoidable tragedy. Governor J.B. Pritzker said, quote, the people of Illinois deserve a full factual accounting of what happened today to ensure transparency and accountability. And the truth is, this isn't the first time the tragedy has followed in these blitz-style operations. So in Southern California, 2 immigrants died in recent months while trying to escape federal raids, one falling from a greenhouse roof and the other struck by a car as he ran across the freeway. So here's the bigger picture. Immigration enforcement doesn't have to look like this. If the goal is to keep violent offenders off the streets, then federal agents and local authorities need to work together instead of staging these surprise raids that escalate into chaos. With coordination, we can prevent more fathers from dying and prevent more officers from being dragged by cars in the first place. Because at the end of the day, fighting crime takes more than a blitz. It takes long-term strategy, accountability, and yes, even humanity. Fear might get you headlines, but coordination can save lives.
Well, I think it's a tragedy, obviously, and people should not be killed during their dealings with law enforcement. And there are certain tactics of law enforcement that I think are too militarized, and they should back off. I'm against no-knock raids. I'm against trying to raid people's homes in the middle of the night when they're disoriented, which they do on purpose to stop you from flushing evidence down the toilet, but results in people, reaching for the gun, thinking they're suffering a kind of home invasion.
Right.
I'm very skeptical of many of those tactics. Now, it remains the case that you should not flee from the authorities.
Absolutely.
If you flee from the authorities, they might shoot at you. You might get hit by a car. You put your life in danger and their life in danger and other people's lives in danger. If you flee in a motor vehicle, it often ends in calamity for many people. So don't do that. This is also why ICE wants to interact with people at the courtroom. Why that one judge who tried to smuggle out the immigration people is so pernicious, because they do it at the courtroom because they know you've gone through metal detectors, so you're not carrying any weapons. So that is the safest way to apprehend or encounter someone for an immigration deportation matter, is inside the courtroom. So we should be more in favor of those kinds of things if we don't want to see these kinds of things.
Yeah, and I think I'm mostly in favor for local authorities working well with federal authorities. I mean, I think just to go to Chicago after weeks of speculation and then days of criticism from leadership there, and to have an incident like this is kind of like the exact things that everybody should not want, right? We obviously don't want somebody from DHS getting hurt, because they said he was hospitalized and hurt after that. And we obviously don't want somebody dying when they should just be arrested and deported if that's the case. Also, when we look at his record, he had some violations on his record in reckless driving, things like this, but it wasn't anything like violent criminals that we're talking about. I know that wasn't on your list. And even though, yes, you could bring up the argument of that somebody actually in that area of the United States got hurt because of a reckless driving immigrant, right? I know that's the whole argument. I'm just saying there's a reckless driving Americans all over the place. And I don't think that's who people were targeting when people were supporting President Trump's immigration reform, saying, yes, get everybody who drives over the speed limit. Yes, yeah. Get everyone who drives. That wasn't what everyone was targeting, right?
If reckless driving is going to be on the speed limit, then fine. If reckless driving is I don't know. Again, it depends.
It depends on the, for sure.
Because
sure,
America, I mean, at the end of the day, they don't have, non-citizens do not have the right to be here. Citizens do. So even citizens who break our laws, they can't be thrown out of the country because they were born here. If you're not a citizen, you weren't born here, then you don't have a right to be in the country. So maybe that seems unfair to you or unfair to some people on the left, but your behavior has to be pretty good, or you can just get removed from the country. They have the right to do
But we're at a
that.
standstill, right? Because we had an opportunity prior to Trump being president to pass real legislation, right? Because you always call immigration a federal issue. So we had an opportunity to pass federal.
Let's call it a federal issue.
Well, I'm saying
I like to make everything a state's issue.
Well, since it's not, right, and since it's in federal hands, then maybe we should have real legislation passed through Congress, something that I know President Trump tends to avoid and enjoys avoiding. But how about we should go back to that immigration policy that he told people not to vote for when Biden was president and see what a real reform looks like? Because even if you're saying it's going to be calm at the courthouse and actually done with just people that have no weapons and having a conversation about whether people are illegal or not, that seems very well thought out and planned out if it looks like that. And whatever concerns that Democrats might be having, let's talk it through and put it down on paper and get it into law. I think that that's the easiest way to make immigration work. But all these temporary solutions are only causing fear throughout communities. And then we know that the federal government's going to leave in a couple weeks. And then what do we have? No real change, no real lasting change. And so that's my biggest issue, is when the Republican Party that likes states to run themselves just go over anybody who's Democratic in a state because they want to do what they want to do. That's against all things that conservatives stand for. So it's just contradictory in every way.
I would like to see immigration reform, but this is an issue. The base has been so clear. They don't want any form of amnesty for any group of illegal immigrants. And so amnesty is such a non-starter. I don't know what you do then. I would support a change in policy so there's a path to citizenship so they can work legally and contribute to our economy, and I think that'd be good. Or even pay their way towards citizenship. My friend Daniel DiMartino, who's an immigration scholar, has a plan along those lines where people who came here illegally would pay the government, help pay down our national debt in order to become above board from the standpoint of the government. I think that's a good idea too. I think these are realistic solutions compared to rounding up millions of people and getting them out. It's going to take tremendous law enforcement resources and just
also it's starting to devastate our economy. Like, I think the farmers that probably didn't expect to be affected in this way because they thought we were targeting violent criminals, and companies like John Deere reporting massive losses because of the immigration tactics, or when you watch factory workers get dragged out and deported. It's kind of like, guys, what's the plan here? I just not understanding the long-term strategy.
The South Korean factory workers did have me extremely upset because they were on a tourism visa, which allows you to do business consulting, and they had just gone a little farther than that and helping put the plan. But they're only the parts are in Korean. They're the ones who know how to assemble the. I can't say on TV. Makes me very. They know how to put the plant together. The government doesn't know how to make the plant.
I just don't understand.
Let them cook.
I don't understand why we're cutting off our nose to spite our face. It seems silly, especially when Trump is somebody for his own businesses that has used undocumented migrants before. So I think a real solution is required through Congress for this to actually work.
Yeah, we got to build things, and I don't want to fight over how it gets done. Let them do it. Welcome back to Rising. Lindsey, what's on your lens today?
Let's get right to it. So immigration is one of those topics that always gets reduced down to sound bites and slogans. But here's the reality. It's not just a political debate. It's a workforce crisis that's threatening the very foundation of America's economy. Now, if you eat food in this country, this issue touches you. So in Pennsylvania, yes, the swing state that President Trump won with 50% of the vote in 2024, farmers are desperate for workers. They're literally watching their livelihoods collapse because they can't find enough workers to milk cows or pick crops or keep farms alive, according to a Politico article. One farmer, John Painter, told the website, quote, "The whole thing is screwed up. We need people to do the jobs Americans are too spoiled to do." It's not coming from a progressive activist. That's coming from a lifelong Republican farmer who voted for Trump 3 times. And that's the irony here. The very communities that backed Trump the hardest are now being squeezed the hardest by his immigration crackdown. Deportations and red tape are slashing the supply of farm workers. Economists say the U.S. lost 155,000 agricultural jobs in just a few months last year. And that's before Trump, or earlier this year, and that's before Trump's latest promises to deport millions more. The Economic Policy Institute estimates that if he follows through, we'll lose not only millions of immigrant workers, but also millions of jobs for U.S.-born workers whose roles are tied to immigrant labor. In other words, less immigrant labor doesn't just hurt immigrants, it shrinks opportunity for everybody. And people are noticing the human side of this too. Earlier this summer, Joe Rogan summed up what a lot of Americans are feeling. Let's take a look at that.
It was a visceral reaction that a lot of people had, the idea of people just showing up and pulling people out of schools and pulling people out of Home Depot and pulling people that were just hardworking people that maybe snuck over here because they didn't have a legal way to get over here. But since they've been here, they've been good people and they're a part of communities. And that's what freaks people out, because when people thought about ICE, they thought, great, we're going to get rid of the gang members. They didn't think, great, you're going to get rid of a landscaper.
Now that disconnect between the political promise and the practical impact is tearing holes in our economy and in our communities. Farmers are being forced to sell off livestock, close operations, or just watch crops rot in the fields. Restaurants are shortening hours, construction sites are slowing down. It's like a domino effect of a labor shortage that we are now creating ourselves.
Yeah, and I don't like that at all.
I saw two articles in the last 2 days. Aside from this political article that really talked about these specific rural Pennsylvania farmers that are losing so many workers and money because of fear and all the different things happening with immigration. Also, I saw that John Deere is cutting a lot of its what's going on with its services because of immigration, but also because of the tariffs. So there's multiple policies that President Trump is implementing that are hurting the average American that have two issues. One is that he said immediately he would fix the economy in multiple ways. And that truly hasn't been foreseen by many Americans that still, in a lot of recent studies, say that they feel financially strained. But on the second hand, it's migrant labor, people don't understand, is a lot of times directly tied to U.S. jobs. So restaurant might cut their hours if they don't have the amount of people washing the dishes in order to keep the thing running. And if their migrants get forced out of places like Chicago and they're on the farms, or places in Pennsylvania, if they're losing labor in jobs that the Republican farmer said he can't really hire Americans to do because they won't take the position, then what do you want people to do? This is an actual account of people losing their livelihood or starting to lose money because of policies that are put in place by these stringent immigration policies that nobody asked for. Even Joe Rogan, who largely was credited amongst other people like Charlie Kirk of getting Trump in office, is saying this is not what anybody was asking for. The humanity side, or realistically, the fact that we're losing jobs now, is not what people were thinking, that you would take the landscaper, you would take a criminal like you promised on the campaign trail.
So I agree with you because I'm a capitalist and I want the jobs to go to
not the humanitarian part. Just the capitalist
No, the capitalist part. I want things to cost less. I want businesses to thrive. I want us to grow food. I want us to build buildings. I want us to be excellent in every way, and that requires a steady flow of labor. So if somebody shows up and they want to do the job, and they do the job well, and they agree to work for what the employer's paying, I don't ask any questions beyond that because I'm not a busybody. I'm not a leftist. I don't care about the conditions or the minimum pay or any of that. You want to work, you want to pay, great, none of my business. As the government, I'm butting out. That's my ruthless capitalistic point of view. Many on the left don't feel that way. They want the government to come in and say what the conditions should be like and how much the person should be paid and what circumstances they can work.
Find long-term solutions to get people paying taxes
taxes, fine, whatever, I guess. And then but in this MAGA, the MAGA view on immigration is that, well, no, Americans should do those jobs. And then I say, well, it costs more to have you can have Americans do the jobs, but they don't work as much and they won't work for as little. And they say that's a good thing. And I disagree because it makes things more expensive, but it just matters what your priorities are. The priorities of many in MAGA, in the immigration restrictionist movement, is to provide more good jobs, higher paying jobs for Americans, for American workers. That's their priority. And so they want the immigrant labor gone. And they'll say to the farmers, they'll say to the factory owners, they'll say to the restaurant owners, the business owners, they'll say, well, then you gotta just shell out more money for American labor. And those people will say, we can't afford to do that without massively jacking up prices or scaling back, which I think is a bad thing because that's what I'm concerned about, but MAGA says so be it.
But as the leader, that's why I'm always like, who's in charge, right? If President Trump is where the buck stops and he's this businessman that could easily break away from the party when it comes to instances like Mamdani because his business and his homes are in New York, why can't he tell the party what the direction is in regards to this? Like, he's hurting a lot of massive businesses with some of these things that he's doing. Even if we look at what happened in Georgia with the plant where we, removed all the workers, and then Hyundai is having these major issues because these workers were building we're putting millions of dollars in that part of the country in order to bolster, an investment they're making in our country, but we've hindered them from doing the job so that we can hire people because of these stringent immigration laws. So like they're going against exact policies that he promised on the economy in other ways. So truly the economy was the number one thing. And if he truly is a businessman, because I feel like he probably aligns with you in that stance of personal, anyway, the way he's moved about business over the last 2 decades, then I can't understand why he's just letting everyone run amok.
I want a businessman president, but a businessman president should recognize that if we're building a factory that relies on technology from South Korea, we're going to need freaking South Koreans to build it, and they're the best qualified people to do it, and we can't make it more expensive for the factory to be built, or it's not going to get built here, and we won't build anything in this country, and it makes me so mad. It makes me furious.
You should just break away from the movement. I see him slowly am I pulling you?
Democrats won't allow the plant to be built because it has to be built on top of the ancestral lands of the Ojibwa people, where there is the rare blue crane is frolicking in the waters somewhere in a 100-mile radius, so we can't have a negative impact on the environment.
So if the bottom
there
line,
is no pro-growth party, unfortunately. It's the Libertarian Party.
But if the bottom line is that the goal would be to bring prosperity to the United States, and just, in that process, if migrants could be treated properly, can we just, sort that out? But also it's going to bring your businesses, for all these capitalists, so much money if we could sort that out. Why is that a problem? Like, it seems like a great time to work together with the administration to figure out what a real long-term solution is to immigration, because
Democrats
people agree about the criminals getting out.
Make everything more expensive by diminishing the supply of labor and land and everything else. It's very sad.
So what shall we do, Robbie?
Become libertarians. Welcome back to Rising. Lindsay, what is in your lens today?
Let's get right to it. So history isn't supposed to be comfortable. It's supposed to be honest. But right now we're watching a dangerous trend, the sanitizing of America's past in order to sell a cleaner, prettier story. But no amount of bleach can wash the blood, scars, and chains out of this country's foundation. The Washington Post recently reported that exhibitions and signs about slavery are being removed from multiple national parks under orders from the Trump administration. Internal emails reviewed by the New York Times also reveal that the Park Service has been told to remove materials deemed, quote, inappropriately disparaging Americans. The translation for that, if it makes white America look bad, it's gotta go. At Fort Pulaski in Georgia, officials have been reportedly asked to pull the scourged back photo. It's a famous 1863 photo of an enslaved man with horrific scars on his back. That Department of Interior told The Hill, when they asked, that they did not ask for the removal of that photo. And they told The Hill, quote, if any interpretive materials are found to have been removed or altered prematurely in error, the department will review the circumstances and take corrective action as appropriate. At Harper's Ferry, more than 30 signs documenting racism faced by formerly enslaved people are slated for removal as well. The order is being interpreted broadly as anything addressing slavery, racism, sexism, LGBTQ rights, or indigenous persecution is now fair game for erasure. And this isn't happening in a vacuum. Since taking office, Donald Trump has consistently pushed policies and rhetoric that minimize or outright erase the experiences of marginalized communities, from painting over the Black Lives Matter mural in D.C. to temporarily scrubbing stories of Navajo code talkers from federal websites. His administration has treated Black and Indigenous history as disposable. Even on Juneteenth, the very day that commemorates the end of slavery, Trump complained that, quote, too many non-working holidays in America. Let's call it what it is. It's whitewashing, pun very much intended. Government sites have been scrubbed of words like injustice and oppression. School libraries have purged writings from amazing authors like Maya Angelou. Exhibits honoring Harriet Tubman and the Tuskegee Airmen have been sidelined. And critics say this is part of a pattern of words and actions designed to, quote, promote a more positive view of the nation's history. But it really is just erasing the parts that don't fit the fairy tale. Pretending that slavery, racism, and a campaign of mass displacement and extermination of indigenous people didn't shape this country won't bring us any closer to the ideals of freedom, equality, and justice. In fact, it pulls us further away. The past explains the present. If you erase the scars, you erase the story. And without the story, you erase the roadmap to progress. Simply saying things like slavery is bad and trying to end the conversation there seriously underplays the harm caused by an institution that forcibly uprooted millions of Africans and condemned them to lifetimes of bondage. Unless you're siding with the slave owners, it wasn't just bad, it was pure evil. So let's be clear, removing evidence in slavery or evidence of slavery and indigenous persecution doesn't make America stronger, it makes America dishonest. History is not a brand campaign, and no matter how much you try to rewrite the story, those scars, like the ones etched across the back of Gordon, the enslaved man in that Civil War photo that may or may not be removed, will always remain. Because the truth is this, America only becomes the nation it promises to be when it stops hiding from the past and starts facing it head on.
Well, I agree with you. I don't want to get rid of the vast majority of these things in all likelihood. I think they're being taken down in acts of malicious compliance. Do you know what that is?
No, break that down for me. I like that term.
That is when, well, I don't think you're going to like what I have to say about it, but that is when the administration will say something perfectly reasonable, like you can't have like pornographic books in the school library, and then they'll say, oh, you're saying we can't teach Maya Angelou or something.
So you're blaming local leaders for interpreting it wrong
They
on purpose.
interpret it wrongly, right? Wrongly on purpose to make the administration look bad.
Well,
the administration is not saying you can't celebrate the Tuskegee Airmen, you can't celebrate Harriet Tubman. I'll put Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill.
That should have happened.
I supported that. I want the gun photo, the one where she's holding a gun and saying, "Come with me to freedom."
Or we can just have a nice smiling faces.
No, I want gun and I want freedom. That's
So look,
beautiful.
I work on a series called World of Travel, where we talk about the past and the future of cities and countries around the world. And so we recently went to Philadelphia and we visited the first quote unquote White House, the president's house, which was George Washington's house. And we spoke with local leadership of the museum and local politicians, and they explained to us that they're getting direct orders from the Department of Interior to review the slave quarters, which is on display at the president's house to show that our first president indeed had slaves. That's not a secret. It's not in our history books, but it should be in history documented in schools, I'm saying. I don't think we learned that specifically, but it is documented if you'd like to find that information.
You learn it in schools, so you absolutely learn it in schools.
But that's something that I think people need to understand, like exhibits like that I saw with my own eyes.
They talk about it. They point out where they were buried.
Someone is sending the directive from the federal government. So if local officials are misinterpreting what the directive they're getting from federal, that's the confusing part. There should be laid out specific guidelines.
They're not misinterpreting it. They're wrongly interpreting it on purpose to make the administration look bad.
I don't think so. These people were genuinely concerned and telling me how much they're pushing back. And since I had direct dialogue with them, that's why I was so passionate about saying something in executive order, which is what we saw Trump do earlier this year, of like, we want to, as the 250th anniversary, we want to get closer to that and make the country have, stop spending so much time on the negative history. It's what I'm paraphrasing, but he also was talking about the Smithsonian, the African American History Museum, and saying about how basically it just harps on negativity when he was there a couple of years ago and said quite the opposite. So it's just a change of tone, and people are misinterpreting it, as long as you're saying, because maybe they're confused by the direction. And so if the direction is coming from the federal government, there needs to be clear guidelines of what you're talking about. Because all the monuments that I've been to, as I've been able to travel across this country sometimes to different states that he's referring to, have had stuff that provides information to children and families and international people coming here trying to understand our history. Right. So to me, that should be clear if you're going to institute something that's an executive order that's so serious, because history really is the housing that makes sure that we don't end up repeating it in the future. We can't take the foundation out.
The Tuskegee Airmen display thing is an example of what I'm talking about, in my opinion. Right? They took down that because they said, oh, we got a mandate to un-DEI everything, so we got to take this down. And Pete Hegseth said, Absolutely not. Don't take that down. That is not consistent with the order to get rid of DEI whatsoever, and in fact said that he thought it was malicious compliance. So we're not, that one was wrongly taken down. We should not.
But this is always the excuse. Like even the Interior Department and the Hill, amazing reporting from, our journalists at the Hill, they reached out to the Interior Department and they said, if this was wrongly taken down, we will take corrective steps. Like everything can't be a knee-jerk reaction to an executive order. If there's something that you are deeply disturbed by as the president that wants to institute this widespread policy, which looks as to be an attack on anything of people of color or indigenous people or marginalized groups, if it is indeed not that, then clarify exactly what you're talking about. Because it's not like we have running rampant amount of sites across the country that are just showing the wrong history. So tell me why that needed to be executive order, why it was this big emergency, and why we're reviewing these things anyway. Because I've been to that African American History Museum, and even his critiques of that, to me, besides from the poster online, we discussed that. They posted something online that talked about what was a white privilege, and and I said I don't agree with that. They took it down. They took it down. They apologized. But in the actual museum, point me one thing that didn't make sense. That's a beautiful example of our nation's actual history.
Right. But just because we think that you got to be a certain age to read The Bluest Eye or Beloved or whatever. Some of those are graphic books. Not saying they're going to get taken out of the library, just like you got to be 13 before you read it. Doesn't mean we're sanitizing all African American literature, right?
And just because we're mocking Juneteenth and telling everybody to go back to work doesn't mean we're being condescending.
Well, I think everybody should go back to work, not specifically for Juneteenth. Just a little too many of these holidays.
Everything is such a coincidence with you. Everything is just such a coincidence. It's like, come on now. You give
President's Day, gone, all the days. All the days got to go.
You want no holidays? You want to be here on Christmas?
I'm a heartless man. Heartless.
Wow. But he does celebrate Halloween. Tells you something about Robbie.
Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thanks so much for joining us on this Wednesday morning. We've got a little
Thursday. Don't push us back.
Oh my gosh, it's Thursday.
Don't be crazy, Robbie.
Well, that's good news. I did a little bit of time traveling just there.
You did.
I was distracted by this beautiful kind of light peeking through the clouds. You all can't see it, but we've got these.
It was so dark yesterday, and Robbie does not like a dreary day. Okay, he's very not sunshine, rainbows, and flowers.
Because I'm so bright and sunshine.
But he doesn't like dark days.
All right, well, coming up on Rising, the former CDC director was testifying on Capitol Hill yesterday, and things did get a little bit testy.
Plus, FBI Director Kash Patel also got into some heated exchanges with Democratic lawmakers over those Epstein files.
Plus, President Trump has vowed to declare Antifa a terrorist organization. But Lindsey, let's get to your radar. What's on it?
Yeah, let's talk about it today. So former President Barack Obama says the nation is at a, quote, inflection point after the assassination of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk. In his first public remarks on the shooting, Obama called Kirk's death a tragedy. Let's take a look.
Regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, what happened to Charlie Kirk was horrific and a tragedy. What happened, as you mentioned, to the state legislators in Minnesota, that is horrific. It is a tragedy.
Now, Obama made those remarks at the Jefferson Educational Society's Global Summit Tuesday night. He argued that America is in the middle of a, quote, political crisis, and went further, noting that the President Trump is fueling divisions with his response to the tragedy. But what stood out to me most was the contrast Obama drew between how presidents respond in moments of national pain. He pointed back to former rivals like George W. Bush, potential president that ran for one, John McCain and Mitt Romney, people who, despite sharp policy differences, understood the assignment when tragedy struck, to unify the country. That reminded me of how Obama himself handled one of the darkest moments of his presidency, the 2015 mass shooting at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Now let's remember, that was a white supremacist who murdered 9 black worshipers in their sanctuary, hoping to ignite a race war. Obama didn't scapegoat political enemies or look for the loudest partisan villain to attack. He just called the shooter what he was, a criminal, and then tried to rally the nation toward unity.
This is not the first time that black churches have been attacked. And we know that hatred across races and faiths pose a particular threat to our democracy and our ideals. The good news is I am confident that the outpouring of unity and strength and fellowship and love across Charleston today, from all races, from all faiths, from all places of worship, indicates the degree to which those old vestiges of hatred can be overcome.
Now that's presidential leadership, setting a tone that calms the country instead of pouring gasoline on an already burning fire. But compare that to how President Trump responded to Kirk's assassination.
It's a long past time for all Americans and the media to confront the fact that violence and murder are the tragic consequence of demonizing those with whom you disagree day after day, year after year, in the most hateful and despicable way possible. For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals.
Now, Trump played the blame game 2 minutes into a 4-minute speech. He took the tragedy and used it as a political tool, targeting his opponents rather than simply mourning the loss and trying to bring unity. Obama this week called that out.
I've noticed that there's been some confusion, I think, around this lately. And frankly, coming from the White House and some of the other positions of authority that suggest, even before we had determined who the perpetrator of this evil act was, that somehow we're going to identify an enemy.
The former president then suggested that this line of thinking could lead the country down the wrong path.
We're going to identify an enemy. We're going to suggest that somehow that enemy was at fault, and we are then going to use that as a rationale for trying to silence discussion around who we are as a country and what direction we should go.
And that's the bigger point here. Leadership isn't about silencing the debate or vilifying half of the country because they hold different views. It's about making space for the disagreement without justifying violence. Not one Democratic leader on the left wished for Charlie Kirk to die because of his views. Not one. Disagreement with someone's ideology is not the same as endorsing their murder, and suggesting otherwise is not only dishonest, it's dangerous. At the end of the day, presidents set the tone. When tragedy strikes, the job is simple, but it's hard. Comfort the nation, call for unity, and make sure the civil discourse continues. Because blaming political rivals for the act of one violent criminal does not just miss the mark, it leaves the country more divided. And to me, that's not leadership.
Well, look, I appreciate the things Barack Obama said there. I don't disagree with them at all. I don't think the immediate aftermath of a horrific mass shooting should be used as some pretext for political persecution of your enemies. And a lot of what the Trump administration is going to do in response to this, I don't agree.
You have said that. Yeah, I want everybody to know that you did say you don't think this is the moment to do that.
But you know, when Obama says not to politicize it, not to blame the rhetoric of your opponents, I just find that to be such a hollow remark, because that has long been the textbook response to tragedies perpetrated by plausibly or discernibly right-wing figures, or assumed to be right-wing figures, by the mainstream media and the Democratic Party and progressive activists. When Gabby Giffords was shot during Barack Obama's presidency in 2012, Democratic representative in Arizona, the response from Democrats, I guess I can't recall precisely what Barack Obama himself said, but the response from Democrats in the mainstream media and progressive activists was overwhelmingly to blame right-wing rhetoric and the Tea Party, even though it turned out the shooter had nothing to do with the right at all.
Can I push back on that? Because I think that the response was to try to go to Congress to push gun laws forward. And that's where discussion and debate... But that's usually the conversation to figure out how
here's
gun
the Guardian.
laws can be pushed
Here's
forward.
the Guardian from 14 years ago. Gabby Gifford shooting, the Guardian's progressive news website. Gabby Gifford shooting reignites row over right-wing rhetoric in U.S. Sarah Palin at center of storm over political vitriol after spree leaves 6 dead. It had nothing to do with Sarah Palin.
That's fine. So Fox News, Newsmax, MSNBC can do what they want. I'm talking about the president.
Yeah.
That's the clear distinction I'm making. It comes from the top down. The president must lead in this moment and be the leader for the party and show an example. And so what President Obama did during his term was to try to be that example. And the rhetoric still continued on who to point fingers and blame at. But when it's coming from the top, to me, that's problematic because we're trying to bring the nation together, or at least we need to try. We are at a really contentious point in our nation's history, and it's not the worst of times, and it doesn't need to be the worst of times. And so it starts from the top on trying to bring people together. That's the biggest issue for me, is that yes, everyone's saying what they want to say. All these people that have podcasts and blogs, I'm not trying to criticize and figure out how to organize all of them. I'm asking for the president to be presidential. Mm-hmm. Isn't that like a fair ask? I think that you should want that from your president as well.
Right, but I just think we're looking back on Obama's own terms with, we're looking at it through rose-tinted glasses to say that there was no division or that division was not being fostered. It was loftier rhetoric than that which is employed by Donald Trump, but conservatives certainly felt that division was being
This week, Senator Dick Durbin was saying that to characterize MAGA as Nazis is problematic. And on the other side, when Republicans characterize Democrats as the party of murder or evil, that's also extremely problematic. Why can't we agree that those things are not right? That these parties don't cause murder and evil, and these parties are not also Nazis, right? This is like just the basis of my argument right here.
Okay, well, I'm fine to take that, to accept your proposal that not to call enemies Nazis or murderers or whatever it is.
Because the people committing the act are the people with the gun. I mean,
right. I don't think that's helpful, and I also don't know that it is plausibly connected to this shooting or any other shooting, the rhetoric of any. That's actually where I draw the biggest line, is that people's inflammatory rhetoric is asserted without evidence that is at the root of the violence problem we're seeing. And this shooter, to be clear, is it has left-wing motivations clearly, but was probably radicalized by online peer groups rather than the rhetoric of political figures. But we'll still be investigating that for some time to come, I think.
Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today, and Amber is in the building on Friday as usual. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. So tell us what's coming up on Rising.
I will. I absolutely will. All right. Coming up on Rising, former presidential candidate Kamala Harris is revealing who her real first choice for vice president was.
Plus, the CDC has an updated MMRV vaccine schedule, but some experts are sounding the alarm.
And Tucker Carlson is issuing a warning after Charlie Kirk's death, apparently over comments made by Attorney General Pam Bondi. But first, Lindsay, tell us what you're seeing in your lens.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about today, so let's get to it. President Trump has now turned his focus to Memphis, making it the latest city he says needs federal intervention to fight crime. He signed an order alongside Tennessee's Republican Governor Bill Lee to establish a new task force there. Now, Trump compared it to what he already did in Washington, D.C., where more than 2,000 National Guard troops have been stationed for weeks. Here he is discussing the executive order to push this forward.
Very important because of the crime that's going on, not only in Memphis, in many cities, and we're going to take care of all of them, step by step, just like we did in D.C. We have virtually no crime in D.C. right now.
Now, this new task force doesn't just include the Guard. It ropes in the FBI, immigration authorities, U.S. Marshals, and more. And on paper, it looks like a major crime-fighting coalition. But when you scratch the surface, it's really about testing the limits of presidential power, forcing or threatening federal intervention in Democratic-led cities under the banner of, quote, law and order. And the numbers in Memphis don't justify this kind of escalation. Just days before Trump's announcement, the Memphis Police Department reported declines across every single major crime category compared to the same time period in recent years. Now, Memphis Mayor Paul Young made his position pretty clear.
I want to be clear, I did not ask for the National Guard, and I don't think it's the way to drive down crime.
Now, here's another problem. When the president deploys federal agents for street patrols, it doesn't just disrupt cities, it derails the work those agencies were actually created to do. So in Washington, we're already seeing it. As Trump deployment of federal agent there enters the second month, the effects are becoming clear. While crime keeps falling, the other investigative work on the FBI is being delayed, frustrating law enforcement and leading some people to actually quit. Many agents who were once focused on financial fraud or things like public corruption now spend 2 or 3 nights patrolling the streets. That means critical investigations, things like witness interviews, search warrants, and planning meetings are slowing to a crawl. So not only does this militarized approach put soldiers on American streets, it also takes away from the very investigations that actually keep our government accountable and our community safe. That's why this should concern all of us. We're being conditioned to accept the military as a recurring answer to non-emergency problems. And when you normalize soldiers in the street, you normalize executive overreach. The truth is pretty simple. The military should not be policing civilians. So why are we normalizing it? Why are we so quick to welcome soldiers into U.S. cities as a fix for crime? Because this isn't about safety. It's about government power expanding where it really doesn't belong. If the past few years taught us anything, it's this. Once you normalize the extraordinary, you lose your ability to call it out when it becomes the rule. And when it comes to putting soldiers on our streets, we can't afford to play that game.
All right, so Memphis, apparently the next city Trump's looking to go into. He's also talked about going into St. Louis. Now, I think one of the important differences between those cities and D.C., of course, is that there's a Republican governor who actually welcomes the National Guard coming in. So what is your take on, if the governor says that they want the assistance and he agrees with the president, then is that still overreach?
Well, and that's what I think. What we saw and the difference between specifically in Memphis is that the governor was standing right next to him when he signed the executive order and said, come on. And the mayor's like, no, I don't want to see this. But I really think that for the Republican Party, who is largely hands off of local cities and states and likes autonomy and has been campaigning for that for my full lifetime, to see this rabbit hole or this can of worms opened up where we don't have dialogue with local leaders about how to support them in ways that they've been vocal about, whether Democratic or Republican, said we need more funding for certain programs or more police officers. Like literally it's a numbers thing. And if we're not having conversations about how to solve this long term, sending the National Guard in, like even in DC, we're going to see 30 days where obviously the crime will go down. There's more police on the street, there's more National Guard on the street, but then we're going to see it go back or just plateau. Even the homeless population that was pushed out come back, because what's the long-term strategy? There still needs to be coordination, I believe, and not kind of this strict, like, I'm laying the iron fist down and President Trump just moves forward with things that, the community is not asking for. There's also a whole layer about community relationships and trust. And so if there's a large community that's saying we're not comfortable with the presence of the National Guard here, then perhaps there's a different way to try to figure out a better solution that doesn't create an unnecessary enemy out of our National Guard.
Well, I am glad to hear you say that apparently Democratic mayors are now asking for more funding for the police, because that was not the case just a few years ago, right?
Yeah,
a lot of them were calling for either defunding the police or rerouting police funding to different services. So if they are asking for more police funding now, I think that's good news overall. But really the problem is not just funding, but also a lack of people who want to be police officers, because there has been an environment created where police officers are really demonized. And in D.C., even as Muriel Bowser rejected calls from the city council to reduce police funding, they still have a shortage of hundreds of officers, which is why the National Guard stepping in is so important. Because speaking to sources on the ground who have seen this firsthand, they talk about how the National Guard's presence has actually freed up the officers who are on the job to be able to focus on really serious issues and serious crime areas like in Southeast or Anacostia, and solve crimes there where previously those issues would have been ignored.
And I think another concern is, because DC is obviously an anomaly, not like any other state, but when we're talking about going after the #1 crime city, my argument from the beginning has been, well, if it's really a national emergency, which DC wasn't even in the top 10, and he's naming Detroit when he was recently in the UK, the president is saying that could be next. He's skipping over several cities in Ohio that are on like the top 5, where he's not even having a conversation, and that governor is Republican and hasn't flat out said he wants troops to come. So if this is really an emergency thing and we're going through top 10, it's almost like he's picking and choosing specific Democratic-led cities to make an example out of them, when he can talk to the governor of Ohio and get some of his cities off that top 10 list. And I just wonder what the strategy is. If it's actually like we're going in order of the top emergency, then fine. In Memphis, have that conversation. The governor has now welcomed you. But otherwise, now the rest of the cities, there's Cleveland, Ohio, Toledo, Ohio. Like, talk to this Republican governor and make it happen. And the Republican governor kind of like is laissez-faire, talk to those mayors. So he's not welcoming, but he's also walking the line saying that this might be a little bit of government overreach without saying it. And so we're kind of seeing that dialogue happen, but not just flat out because people don't want to go against President Trump, I believe, because they understand that's not, with the base may not settle them and be comfortable for them to continue forward. But couldn't this all be handled, since these are non-emergencies, with dialogue and conversation and collaboration. And I think that those are the key things that are missing from making this a long-term, eventful, and working strategy.
I guess the question, though, is what is the dialogue that's being offered by, let's say, the mayor of Chicago or the mayor of Memphis? What are they asking the Trump administration to do that is reasonably going to bring down crime? And I haven't really seen them throw out any other solutions besides this temporary National Guard assistance. So I think it's fine to have conversations and collaboration, but when you have Mayor Brandon Johnson, for example, saying that he's not going to work with the Trump administration and he's furious that they're enforcing immigration law, they don't want the National Guard to come in to take on the homicide problem, that just doesn't seem constructive to me.
Right, but then we have a contentious relationship and we're trying to figure out who to blame first, right? You understand, and we can agree that President Trump has a very direct style and approach of talking to people that doesn't land well with a lot of people. And when you start with force and kind of mention it in D.C. and then have a dialogue with Mayor Muriel Bowser after the fact, then that's what the format has been laid out of what it's going to look like. I'm going to do this, you respond later, oh, it's working, okay, now we talk. When really we could talk first and organize this. And so I think when you don't welcome the conversation on the forefront and expect the mayors to lead presidentially when you're not even doing that, that's a large request when you are where the buck stops for this entire country.
Yeah, I guess I would say that the leadership is just doing it in D.C. because it is the nation's capital. Obviously, they don't have the same rights as a district as cities and states do. So I think the president did lead by choosing to send the National Guard in amidst this massive crime wave. But we obviously agree to disagree on that one.